Hello! This is part 4 of our series on Spanish Subjunctive. I'm your host, not your Spanish professor. And today we're gonna cover more advanced subjunctive triggers, specifically conditional triggers, the stuff that looks like this. Aunque está lloviendo, voy a salir, and aunque llueva, voy a salir. Both sentences use aunque, but in the first sentence we use normal indicative mood, and the second sentence triggers subjunctive. Why? If I told you now, you would leave me, and I'm very lonely, so do the math. Before we begin though, please make sure you watched parts 1, 2 and 3, as they are integral to this series. Don't forget to grab additional materials, such as a PDF and a quiz to get additional practice. Thank you for joining, and let's begin. Chapter 0. What are conditional triggers? In the part 2 video, we talked about showing uncertainty towards other people's actions, such as wishes, emotions or doubts. And in the previous part 3 video, we covered the time-based triggers, which were showing uncertainty about when something would happen. Today we're gonna show the uncertainty about whether a condition is real or hypothetical. So what is a condition? A condition is basically some kind of if scenario. If this happens, I do that, and if that happens, I'll do something else. It's not always about using the conjunction if, but the idea of if is often implied when we talk about conditions. The good thing is that in today's video we will not be learning any new concepts. Today our master rule will be the most basic subjunctive crap ever, which is the idea of reality versus fantasy from part 1. What that means is, when we have a real or known condition, meaning that we know it's true or it's actually happening, then we'll be using normal indicative mood. But when we're gonna talk about hypothetical or uncertain conditions, which are not always sure for us whether they're gonna happen or not, then we're gonna use subjunctive. This is the same core idea, just different context. Later today we will also revisit the concept of an event from the previous part 3 video, but don't worry about it yet. Here are the conditional triggers that we will be discussing today. Aunque, a menos que, con tal de que, en caso de que, siempre que, si, como si. I promise you it's not gonna be as scary as you might think, provided that you watched my previous videos. Now let's proceed. Chapter 1. Aunque. We begin with aunque. It can be translated as even though and even if, and knowing the difference between these translations is vital to understanding how aunque works. Similarly to how we had mientras in the previous video. Whether we need to use subjunctive or not will depend on what we know. Now let's go through each translation one by one. Translation number 1. Even though. When we say even though, we are stating the condition that we know to be true. Since we know it's true, it becomes a fact, and when we are talking about facts or reality, we use a normal indicative mood without worrying about subjunctive. For example, aunque Marcos está cansado, trabaja mucho. Marcus knows he's tired, we all know that. Marcus is a legend. And he works a lot in spite of being tired. He acknowledges the fact that he is tired, the condition that he knows to be true, and he still does his thing. When we use even though, there's no uncertainty. We're describing a condition that we know to be true. Let's look at another example. Aunque no me gusta, lo haré. Same here, I know that I don't like it, but I will do it regardless, whatever it is. No uncertainty, no subjunctive. One more example. Aunque llovía, salimos. We knew it was raining, we acknowledged the fact that it was raining, and knowing that, we still decided to go out. No subjunctive needed. Translation number 2. Even if. This is where it gets interesting. When aunque means even if, we're talking about a condition or a possibility that we are not certain about. Or maybe we're explicitly saying that it does not matter whether something is true or not. That uncertainty or irrelevance is what triggers subjunctive. For example, aunque Marcos esté cansado, trabajará mucho. See the difference? It doesn't matter whether Marcos is tired or not. It will not change the outcome. Maybe he is tired, maybe he's not. He will work regardless. But since technically we don't know if he's tired or not, this creates uncertainty which requires us to trigger subjunctive. That's why the verb estar has to take subjunctive esté instead of a normal indicative está. Another example. Aunque no me guste, lo haré. What do we have here? I will do it regardless of whether I like it or not. If we said even though I don't like it, it would be a fact. But with even if, we create uncertainty where we need to trigger subjunctive and use no me guste instead of no me gusta. One more example for you. Aunque llueva, saldremos. Even if it rains. We don't know if it will, but we don't care, we will go out regardless. Before we finish this chapter, I will show you 3 more examples shown side by side to better illustrate the difference between even though and even if. Aunque está enfermo, trabaja. Aunque esté enfermo, trabajará. Aunque no tiene dinero, lo compra. Aunque no tenga dinero, lo comprará. Aunque llegó tarde, entró. aunque llegue tarde, entrará. I'm showing you this example side by side to illustrate that the difference between two types of aunque lies entirely in the speaker's head. What do you know at the moment of speaking? If it's a confirmed fact, then we mean to say even though, and we need to use normal indicative conjugation. But if it's a hypothetical or irrelevant condition that does not change the outcome, then you or the speaker use aunque to say even if, which shows uncertainty and triggers subjunctive. From the Spanish perspective, it's even easier. If you see aunque using indicative mood, it can be translated as even though or although. But if you see or hear subjunctive after aunque, then it has to be even if. Time for the first test. Here are two sentences for you. Aunque haga frío, Marta llevará camiseta. And aunque hace frío, Marta lleva camiseta. Your job is to tell me where aunque uses indicative and where it triggers subjunctive and why. Pause the video if you need more time. 3, 2, 1, boom. In the first sentence, the verb hacer is conjugated in a subjunctive form, which means aunque here can be replaced with even if, showing that it only might be called. Whether it actually is called or not does not matter. Marta will wear a shirt regardless. However, in the second sentence, we have the normal indicative hace, which can only mean that it is called right now. Since it's a fact, there's no need for subjunctive. Good job! Let's continue with the next trigger. Chapter 2. A menos que. A menos que means unless. The best part about it is that it always triggers subjunctive, and the reason why is because by definition, unless introduces a condition that might prevent something from happening. We never know whether a condition will be met. This creates uncertainty, and you know what that means. Let's look at some examples. Iré a la fiesta a menos que esté cansado. I might go to the party, or maybe I won't. It will all depend on the condition of me being tired or not. Easy, right? Here's another. No te ayudaré a menos que me lo pidas. If you ask me, I'll help you. If you don't, I won't. Simple uncertainty which requires us to trigger subjunctive for the verb pedir, to ask. So we have pidas instead of a normal indicative pides. Last example. Puedes quedarte a menos que Marcos llegue tarde. If Marcos arrives late, you'll have to get the fuck out. Otherwise, you can stay. One more thing to mention is that there are two more ways how to say unless in Spanish, and it's salvo que and a no ser que. Both work exactly the same as a menos que, meaning that they always trigger subjunctive. That's it. Test number 2. Translate this sentence in Spanish and use whichever option to say unless that you want. I will call you unless you're asleep. Just a little tip. One of the ways how to say to be asleep in Spanish is estar dormido. Use this structure for the test. Now, chop chop cabrones. 3, 2, 1. So what do you have for me? I will call you is te llamaré or te voy a llamar. Unless is a menos que, a no ser que, or salvo que. And finally, we need to conjugate estar dormido correctly. Since unless triggers subjunctive, we need to use estés dormido instead of estás dormido. So what we have is te llamaré a menos que estés dormido. Good work, my friend. Now let's continue with the next trigger. Chapter 3. Con tal de que and caso de que. Even though con tal de que and en caso de que have different translations, they work exactly the same way, so I decided to group them into the same chapter. Both of them introduce hypothetical conditions, and that's why they will always trigger subjunctive. Let's start with con tal de que. It means as long as, or provided that. Con tal de que introduces a condition that must be met, but there's no guarantee it will be. If you remember from the previous video, mientras would work the same exact way when it's translated as long as. The beauty of con tal de que is that you don't need to think about translations or meanings, unlike mientras, so it makes it much easier for us. Here are some examples. Puedes ir con tal de que llegues a tiempo. Lo haré con tal de que me ayudes. And me quedaré con tal de que no haya problemas. Nothing crazy, right? All these conditions create uncertainty and therefore we have to use subjunctive. Now let's see what en caso de que has to offer. It can be naturally translated as in case or in the event that. And as you can hopefully see, it introduces a hypothetical scenario by definition. Something you're preparing for but don't know if it will happen. Uncertainty. Here are some examples. Lleva el paraguas en caso de que llueva. Te llamo en caso de que necesites ayuda. Guarda el número en caso de que haya algún problema. All sentences show hypothetical scenarios which require us to use subjunctive after en caso de que. Remember, both con tal de que and en caso de que always trigger subjunctive. New test. 2 sentences. Just conjugate the verbs correctly. Puedes salir con tal de que la tarea. Toma el abrigo en caso de que frío. 3, 2, 1. First of all, I hope it's obvious that both sentences trigger subjunctive. Having realized that, all we need to do for the first sentence is to switch the ending, so we have subjunctive termines instead of terminas. As for the second sentence, the verb hacer is an exception, so we have to memorize how it works. For this sentence, we have haga. As a gentle reminder, don't worry too much about conjugations yet. Let's proceed. Chapter 4. Siempre que. Our next trigger can have two different translations, whenever and as long as. Each translation will have a different behavior when it comes to trigger and subjunctive, again, similarly to how mientras works. Before we proceed, I hope you still remember the concept of an event that we learned in a previous video. It states that habitual and past events, the ones that you know happen or happened, will require us to use in normal indicative mood, and the future events, which you don't know if and when they will happen, will require us to use subjunctive. Having said that, let's go through each translation of siempre que. Translation number 1. Whenever. When siempre que is translated as whenever, it works exactly the same way as cuando from the previous video, meaning that habitual and past events stay in the indicative mood, and only future events will trigger subjunctive. Let's go through each event one by one. First, habitual event. Siempre que tengo tiempo, leo. We are describing a routine which has no uncertainty, therefore there is no need for subjunctive here. Now let's see a past event. Siempre que tuve tiempo, leí. Here we are describing a past routine, something that we know happened or was happening. No subjunctive here either. Finally, let's see the future event. Siempre que tenga tiempo, leeré. This time we're describing an uncertain event in the future. Since we don't know exactly when it's gonna happen, we have to express this uncertainty by triggering subjunctive for the verb tener. That's it, exactly how cuando works. Now let's continue. Translation number 2, as long as. When siempre que means as long as, just like before, it always triggers subjunctive, same as mientras from the previous video and con tal de que in this video. I understand that it might be confusing with so many similar translations across all the triggers, but don't worry about it yet. Just think of them as different options in your tool belt. Luckily, they all work the same way. In this case, always trigger subjunctive, and there's no need to worry about which type of event it might be. Let's look at examples. Puedes quedarte siempre que no hagas ruido. Here's one more. Te apoyaré siempre que seas honesto. Lastly, siempre que haya respeto, todo irá bien. As you can see, as long as is a very straightforward and easy door to subjunctive because it introduces a condition with no clear outcome. However, when we say whenever, we're specifying a temporal action which triggers uncertainty, but only in the future. Test number 4. I will give you two sentences with no translations, and I want you to conjugate the verbs correctly depending on which type of siempre que we're dealing with. Marcos trabaja bien siempre que suficiente, and puedes usar mi coche siempre que con cuidado. Take your time, and that's enough. The first sentence describes a normal habitual routine. The verb trabajar, to work, is conjugated in the present tense. If it were a future tense, perhaps we could translate it as Marcus will work good whenever he sleeps well, or even Marcus will work well as long as he sleeps well, both of which would trigger subjunctive. But here we're just describing a normal routine, which means we can translate siempre que as whenever. Since it's a habitual event, there's no need for subjunctive, so we have Marcus trabaja bien siempre que duerme suficiente. In the second sentence, though, we are clearly giving you permission to drive our car on the condition that you drive it carefully. With a condition like this, we will translate siempre que as long as, and thus we are required to trigger subjunctive for the verb conducir, which gives us puedes usar mi coche siempre que conduzcas con cuidado. And that's it. Good work. Chapter 5. Si. This is the most important conditional trigger in Spanish. As you probably know, si means if, and it works very differently than any other trigger. The single most important rule to burn into your memory is that si never triggers present subjunctive. If it ever takes subjunctive, it would be another beast called the imperfect subjunctive that comes with its own set of conjugations and exceptions. But do not worry, we will go through everything together. When it comes to using si, we can only have two types of situations. Type 1. A real condition, which requires us to use si and present indicative, or type 2, hypothetical or contrary to fact. This will require us to use si plus imperfect subjunctive. Let's start with type 1. What is a real condition? When it comes to using si, we're describing a genuine, real-world possibility of something happening, regardless of whether the condition will prove to be true or not. The fact that the condition is plausible makes this condition real, in our eyes at least, or in the eyes of the speaker. When this happens, we use si plus present indicative tense in the condition clause and then present or future indicative tense for the outcome or result. We don't need subjunctive at all, even though it looks like we're describing an uncertainty. Let's look at some examples. Si llueve, me quedo en casa. You see the problem? If it rains, I will stay at home, but if it doesn't, then what? I don't know, I guess I'll do something else. It seems like we're describing an uncertainty, which would, under normal circumstances, require us to use subjunctive. But like I said, the conjunction si works differently. In this sentence, we strongly feel that it might rain today. Maybe the forecast said it might rain, or you just genuinely feel like it would rain. In our eyes, this condition, this possibility is real. Again, the possibility, not the outcome. We don't care about the result when we use si. So we have to use the structure si llueve, that is si plus present indicative tense in the condition clause, and me quedo, or you can say me quedaré, en casa, which is present or future indicative tense for the result. It's actually very similar to how we would say it in English. I'm sorry if I'm being a bit vague, I hope I'm making some sense. Now let me show you another example. Si tengo tiempo, te llamo. If I have time, I'll call you. If I don't, who knows really, maybe I'll call you anyway, or not. Again, when we use si, the outcome does not matter. Right now, this is a real possibility in my eyes. One more example. Si Marcos trabaja mucho, tendrá éxito. See the idea? If Marcus works hard, he might succeed. It's an absolutely realistic scenario, unless Marcus is a well-known moron. Remember one thing, no subjunctive of any kind here. It's a very popular mistake people make. It is confusing, I understand, because at first you think that, as always, you're describing some sort of uncertainty, and therefore you have to use si plus present subjunctive like this. Si llueva, me quedo en casa. Si tenga tiempo, te llamo. Si Marcos trabaje mucho, tendrá éxito. But this is wrong. Do not ever do this. You can never trigger present subjunctive when you use si. But what about the second type of subjunctive? Oh, I thought you would never fucking ask. Seriously, I was hoping you would forget about this already. Let's just get a beer. Oh boy. For anyone who's still watching, Type 2, hypothetical condition. When we describe something imaginary, unlikely, or contrary to current reality, C has to take imperfect subjunctive. This is a different subjunctive tense, not the present subjunctive we have been practicing so far. Even though, like I said before, we will cover imperfect subjunctive in great detail in a future dedicated video, I cannot completely ignore it until then. That's why I will give you a quick crash course right now. So what is a perfect subjunctive? Just like the present subjunctive exists to show us the uncertainty for the future, imperfect subjunctive exists to describe an uncertainty in the past. This includes unreal and imaginary situations, such as, if I won the lottery, I would quit my job. If I were you, I would take that job. If I lived in Spain, I would speak Spanish every day. This is called a hypothetical condition. We know that they are not true, basically we're just bullshitting. The second part of these sentences usually has would in them. This is how you know that we're not dealing with anything real or possible. In English, the structure of these sentences is much simpler. All we do is if plus past tense and then would. There's a little exception here where in English we have to say if I were instead of if I was. But English is a very stupid language, so you are probably used to this kind of stuff already. Other than that, subjunctive in English is pretty simple. Now let's see how to build this same structure but in Spanish. What we need is si, then the verb conjugated in the imperfect subjunctive tense, and then we need to have a verb conjugated in a conditional tense in the second part of the sentence. So how do we conjugate the imperfect subjunctive? Most of the time the verbs will end with ra, ras, ra, ramos, and ran. Here are the examples for the verbs tener, llover, and trabajar. I'm not gonna read all that aloud, just pause the video and think about what you are doing with your life. There are more quirks and exceptions to learn in imperfect subjunctive, but for now this should be enough for you not to get overwhelmed. Let's come back to hypothetical scenarios. We're gonna take the same sentences we used in the previous type 1 real part and compare them against type 2 hypothetical ones. The first one was this. Si tengo tiempo, te llamo. This is the real possibility. I hope you still remember this. No subjunctive here. Now look at this. Si tuviera tiempo, te llamaría. See the difference? Here we know that we do not have time, but in theory, hypothetically, if I did, I would call you. We use the imperfect subjunctive form for the verb tener that comes after si, and the verb llamar, to call, takes normal conditional tense. This is the tense where you add ia, ias, ia, iamos, and ian to the verb endings to essentially say that you would do something. Now let's look at the second pair. First we have si llueve, me quedo en casa. It might rain, a real possibility, versus si lloviera me quedaría en casa. Here we actually know that it's not raining. This is purely hypothetical. Lastly, we have this. Si Marcos trabaja mucho, tendrá éxito. This is a realistic scenario. Marcos can make it. No subjunctive here. However, when we say it like this, si Marcos trabajara más, tendría más éxito. When put like this, it states that everyone knows that Marcus does not work a lot, so there's no way he can be more successful. This stuff is not easy, I understand, but it will get easier, I promise. Pasito a pasito, suave suavecito. Test number 5. Let's see if I'm making any sense. I will give you 3 sentences and I want you to tell me which ones are grammatically correct and why. Si tengo dinero, compro el coche. Si tenga dinero, compro el coche. Si tuviera dinero, compraría el coche. Take your time. 3, 2, 1, basta. So what do we have here? In the first sentence, we are describing a real condition, a condition outcome of which might result to be true. I might actually have money to buy a car. That's why the verb tener, to have, uses normal present indicative tense. The second sentence is grammatically incorrect. I hope you can see that. The verb tener is conjugated in a present subjunctive form, which can never ever happen after using si, regardless of what we're trying to say. And the last sentence is describing a condition which is contrary to the fact. We know that we don't have money, but we like to imagine what would happen if we did. That's why after si we have the verb tener conjugated in the imperfect subjunctive form, tuviera. And whatever comes next, in our case comprar, is conjugated in a normal conditional tense. So we have compraría. That's it. This is not easy, but I feel like you did a good job there. We're almost done. Chapter 6. Como si. This is our last trigger. I have good news. After everything we've just been through, this one will be the easiest one. Como si means as if, and it always triggers imperfect subjunctive. Nothing else. Only imperfect subjunctive. Why does it trigger subjunctive? Because as if describes a comparison with something that isn't actually true. By definition, it's hypothetical and contrary to reality, which makes it imperfect subjunctive territory. So basically, it works exactly as the type 2 hypothetical si we've just learned. Let's look at some examples. Marcos habla como si supiera todo, as if he knows everything. When this structure is used, we clearly know that Marcos in fact does not know everything. So this statement is contrary to the fact. Supiera is the imperfect subjunctive form of the verb saber, to know. Next example. Me tratas como si fuera un niño. Clearly I'm not a child. Fuera is the imperfect subjunctive form of the verb ser, to be. It's an exception. Gastas dinero como si fuera tuyo. As if it were yours. It is not, therefore we need imperfect subjunctive. Last example. Se comportó como si no hubiera pasado nada. Nothing happened, huh? Think again, because we all know that something did in fact happen. Hubiera is the imperfect subjunctive form of the verb haber, to have. That's it. Test number 6, or as I like to call it, the last test. Fill in the blank. Marcos gasta como si millones. Do not worry, I will help you out a bit. You have 3 options. Tiene, tenga, and tuviera. Take your time. 3, 2, 1. So, we can clearly see como si here, which means that we're describing something hypothetical or contrary to the fact, which requires us to always use imperfect subjunctive. In this case, we have the verb tener, to have. So let's find it, shall we? First we have tiene, which is a normal present indicative form, so that's a no-no. Then we have tenga, which is a present subjunctive form, and we don't do that here either. Lastly, we have tuviera, and it feels like the only thing that is left, therefore this has to be our guy. It's also correct. So what we have is Marcos gasta como si tuviera millones. That's it. Well, look at you doing hard things. Now let's do a little recap and get the hell out of here. Today we went through 6 chapters of conditional triggers. Seems like a lot, but who cares at this point? In chapter 1 we covered aunque, which can mean even though or even if, depending on what you or the speaker know in the moment. Look at these 2 sentences. Aunque Marcos está cansado, trabaja. And aunque Marcos esté cansado, trabajará. When we say even though, we are conveying a fact, therefore there's no need to use subjunctive. However, even if is describing something hypothetical, which requires us to trigger subjunctive. In chapter 2, we covered a menos que and its 2 synonyms, salvo que and a no ser que. All of them mean unless, and they always trigger subjunctive. No iré a menos que me invites. Chapter 3 showed us 2 triggers, con tal de que, which means as long as, provided that, and en caso de que, which means in case of or in the event that. Both of them always trigger subjunctive. Puedes ir con tal de que llegues a tiempo, and lleva el paraguas en caso de que llueva. In chapter 4, we learned about siempre que, which can be translated as whenever and as long as, similarly to how mientras worked in the previous video. When we use it as whenever, it follows the event logic, meaning that for the habitual and past events we use normal present indicative tense and only future events will trigger subjunctive. Siempre que tenga tiempo, leeré. However, when it's translated as long as, it will always trigger subjunctive, just like all other as long as options we have. Puedes quedarte siempre que no hagas ruido. Chapter 5 was the trickiest one, that's for sure. We learned how si works. Si means if, and in order to use it correctly, we have to learn the concepts of real and hypothetical conditions. Look at these two sentences. Si tengo tiempo, te llamo. Here the speaker is discussing a real possibility, in this case genuinely having time. In cases like that, we never use subjunctive of any kind. Now let's compare it with this. Si tuviera tiempo, te llamaría. In this case, we're speaking hypothetically, because we know that we do not have time. Structures like this always require subjunctive, but different type of subjunctive, called imperfect subjunctive. It has its own sets of conjugations and exceptions, which will be covered in more detail in future videos. Lastly, in chapter 6, we learned about como si, which means as if. As if is by definition describing something contrary to a fact, thus making us always use the same imperfect subjunctive again, only imperfect one. Marcos habla como si lo supiera todo. It works exactly how normal si works, but only when we talk about hypothetical stuff. As always, I know that this is a lot, but we do what we gotta do. None of this is easy, but I hope I was able to make it suck a little less. Please do not forget about the additional materials, PDF and quiz are at your disposal to help you internalize this stuff. You will be fine, I promise. Let me know how your Spanish journey is going in the comments down below. And the previous video can be found here, and the next video will be right here once it's done. In there we're gonna cover purpose and probability triggers such as tal vez, para qué, sin qué, and whatever else. Stay safe and see ya!